Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for an event organized by Physicians for Human Rights Independent Defenders about atrocities in Sudan and the role of the Human Rights Council in that regard. My name is Layla Matar, and I represent Human Rights Watch here in Geneva. I should also note that this event is being live streamed and can be shared with others as well after the event. I think many of us here in the room have been watching the human rights situation in Sudan for many years, with violations ongoing without a credible response by the Human Rights Council and without accountability to speak of. And since December 2018, I think many of us have been holding our breaths and watching the courageous protest movement on the ground. And we have seen that there has, of course, been a lot of turbulent changes in the human rights situation on the ground, in the political situation on the ground, while the human rights violations remain and continue. And our hope today is that the panel will be able to help uncover some of these changes and also elaborate on what these changes mean for the human rights situation, which continues to be, as I've said, dire. So first, let me briefly introduce you to our distinguished panelists. To my left, we have Dr. Shaza Elmahdi, who's the Advocacy Director of the Sudanese American Physicians Association. To my right, we have Saleh Mahmoud Osman, who's the human rights lawyer from Darfur and part of the Democratic Alliance of Sudanese Advocates. To his right, we have Dr. Nahid Tobia, who's the director of the Institute of Reproductive Health and Human Rights in Sudan, based in Khartoum. And then to my far left, we have Mr. Nasruddin Abdul-Bari, who's an academic, author, lawyer, and human rights advocate. Thank you so much all for being with us today. Without further ado, I think I will give it first to you, Dr. Shaza. I would be grateful if you could give us perhaps an overview of the events that we've seen since December 18th and focus a little bit on the democracy movement that we've seen and also perhaps on the role of physicians specifically in that context. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Layla, and thank you all for being here. My name is Shaza Elmahdi. I'm here representing Saba. Saba is the Sudanese Association for Sudanese American Physician Association. It's a platform of over 300 physicians based in the United States. Most of them are Sudanese. Recently, they are practicing medicine or even just practicing there. The main idea of establishing the platform is to support the revolution in Sudan back in December 2018. And since then they have been doing a great job in terms of supporting our fellow physicians in Sudan who were at the very forefront of the revolutions in terms of the different bodies that they have, including the Sudanese Central Doctors Committee, which was the main body that takes the responsibility of verifying and reporting on victims and those who were killed during the demonstrations. We also part of different partnerships that we've had, including our partnership with Physicians for Human Rights, and we had the chance to work with them closely while they were producing their comprehensive reports about the intimidation and persecutions, mainly focusing on the Sudan's attack on peaceful protesters and physicians. Also, we've been working closely with other kind of physicians unions, including the one in UK and others, to report on the Sudanese atrocities. It's given to most of us who were following closely what was going on in Sudan, that the revolutions in Sudan since December 2018 have gone through different kind of phases, starting in December 2018 through a couple of days ago when the two parties, the SPA and Freedom and Change forces, signed the deal. We have gone through many kind of phases, including the one that has happened before in February 2019, when al-Bashir announced the emergency following what was going on, which is basically the population who were taken into the street protesting against al-Bashir. And despite the huge number of killing and torture and detention that was going on during that period, the Sudanese population, the Sudanese citizens continued to protest against the previous regime, asking al-Bashir to step down. In March, al-Bashir announced that all women who were in jail at that time should be released. and this happened. That was a very strange movement from his side. In April, in the same year, the 6th and 7th of April, we had the mass protest that was asking al-Bashir to step down, and that was the initiation of the sit-in protest right in front of the headquarters of the Sudanese army. The sit-in that ended in June 3rd with a mass killing of almost 128 and also mass cases of rape. I think there were like 80 verified sexual assault cases happened during that day. Since June up to July, we've had the ups and downs between the two parties in terms of the negotiation, which was suspended for some time from the SPA and Alliance's side because they had 6 conditions. I believe there was like some sort of compromisation from SPA side because none of the 6 conditions were actually fulfilled completely, but there were some sort of promises from the TMC, which is the Transitional Military Council, to respond to some of these conditions, including creating some sort of investigative body. The initial call was to have international investigative committee to look into these kind of violations, the human rights violations, especially those happened in the June 3rd, but also to include all the kind of violations that have been occurring since December 2018. I will not talk that much about the deal right now. I'll probably leave it to other colleagues, but just to reflect on the fact that the Sudanese physicians in Sudan were not just treating or doing the counseling work they needed to be done for the victims, but they were also politically very active in terms of addressing the situation in Sudan and trying to find a solution to that situation. As I'm speaking to you right now, and despite the fact that we have a deal that has been signed, that we don't know much about it because the final drafted and signed one hasn't been released yet, but there are signs that we are not actually making huge progress in terms of human rights violation. And as I'm speaking to you right now, the internet blackout is still happening in Sudan. People in Sudan, they do not have access to the internet, which has been taken as the first thing to be done by the TMC, at least to reflect some sort of good intention in terms of moving toward the transition. It's clear for most of us that the only path forward is to negotiate a deal with the TMC. Otherwise, only God knows what kind of path we will be heading to. But at the same time, there was like some sort of international pressure as well to sign a deal that there is assumption it will end the atrocities in Sudan, which is apparently is not clearly that will happen. There is some sort of fragile ground, if I may say, and the deal itself is not standing on a very solid ground from both parties. So there is a huge belief that anytime this deal may just collapse. And there are indicators for that, and I will also leave it for the discussion. Finally, I will just touch on the women's role in this revolution. I believe most of you have seen those photos for brave Sudanese women who were really leading the protest everywhere. And they were not just leading the protest, they were on the back scene, you know, from behind organizing and coordinating and actually leading the protest at different levels, including the different professions union that were under the umbrella of the Sudanese Professional Association, whether they were doctors or physicians or engineers or lawyers or journalists. At the same time, they were also acting, like functioning in a very extensive way as part of the other political parties who were under the SPA umbrella, the Declaration of Freedom and Change. At the same time, they haven't been actually well represented in all the layers of the political process, including the negotiation itself. We've seen fewer women, maybe just one among 10, representing the negotiation, the deal, the political deal. And we believe, going forward, we may not even see that much women represented, whether in the presidential council, which will have 5 from the military and 5 from the opposition parties, excuse me, and one additional person who will both agree on like a mutual agreement on him. No one knows the names yet, but there is a belief that the trend of not having women represented in the different layers of the government will keep going. We have 67% at all positions from the legislative body, but also there is no clear idea on how women will be represented in this body. And I will leave it here, but I'm happy to discuss further points with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elmahdi, for the overview and also for zooming in on the role of physicians. And you ended by speaking about the role of women and the lack of representation. So could I please ask you, Dr. Tubia, to elaborate a little bit on human rights violations that are being experienced by women, both historically and now, and a bit more about their role in the current processes?
Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Nahi Tubia. I am a physician, and currently I'm the director of the Institute for Reproductive Health and Rights. As a company, we're actually not a profit company. We were not even allowed to register as the Institute for Reproductive Health and Rights because we were told the word rights cannot be included. So we're also the Institute for Reproductive Health according to the government. I'm only saying that to show you that rights, particularly for women, is not something that's been accepted. I want to talk historically. Sudanese society is a traditional society. Like many African, Middle Eastern societies, we are both African and Arab-speaking, let's call it. Women are restricted, but historically were not obviously violated, let alone the khitan or FGM, that's a whole other issue, but no obvious physical violation of women culturally was acceptable. But having a traditional society with restriction on women, when Bashir came with his Islamist military idea of very, very repressive interpretation of Islam as his agenda, he used women as a way to reach men. So the more we restrict women, cover them forcibly, forcing Islamized covering as opposed to the traditional Sudanese talk, which is not our culture. Even whipping women, of course, a lot of you seen women whipped on the internet. Thousands every year are whipped for infringes on morality. Of course, the people who suffer that most are the poorer women, the less educated, the house workers, the marginalized from the periphery or from not the center, and also women who are immigrants, Ethiopians, Eritreans, and others. That systematic state violation of in broad daylight created something in the culture. It made it a culture where violating women became more and more acceptable, even in public places. Even by how much women are harassed in the streets or violated. That's a very important point that I wanted to make. Because that very integrated, institutionalized with the police, with the security in the streets, to violate women became the norm in Sudan over the last 30 years. So let us move forward to December 19, 2018, when the uprising, I would call it at the time, that became the revolution. It was definitely led by the youth, and particularly with participation of young women. Later, other women joined, older women, grandmothers, rural women. But the women participated equally first, but then when the pressure became high with the tear gases and the beatings, some of the younger people retreated, the women became the leaders in the forefront, and that's what my colleague has mentioned, Musna Mahdi. Women stood up and said, you know what, the repression we are seeing in the streets by this government and its apparatus, what we get at home from the cultural repression, I might as well die or get beaten up. This is the actual quotes that are taken on videos where women say, what's happening at home is worse than this, I'm gonna risk my life. This is the cultural issues that we need to talk about, because no matter what happens in the future, we need to dismantle that mindset. So this is what's happening. During the uprising, women were beaten more, sexually harassed, broken their bones, partly to stop them from being leaders, but also because, again, in a traditional societies, men don't like to see their women being violated, because they're their women with their honor. So move forward. This was happening over the 6 months. Let's talk about June 3rd, because you all know the events and the milestones. June 3rd, the violation of women took another level. That's when the rapes of Darfur, which they always negated or denied, came to Khartoum. The Janjaweed, who are completely uncontrollable, you know, ferocious, untamed, many of them just paid militias, raped women, raped many women. I think we know that there's a lot of documented cases. Ahfad University Trauma Center have documented, but we think the documented cases are only a fraction, because again, in a traditional society, it's very difficult to go and say, I am raped, or I have been raped. So a lot of women, their lives were destroyed and they can't speak about it even. We know for sure that 2 women took their own life because they were raped. They killed themselves. And 1 woman had to have her uterus removed because she was gang raped. This is what's happened from June 3rd. And the Janjaweed are still walking around. Maybe they're not raping as much as they do, but they can at any minute. So I'm here appealing to you because we need the international community's pressure to dismantle the state institutionalized violations against everybody. By the way, there are some young men who were also raped, and they cut their hair and all kinds of things. We need to dismantle that structure legally. There is a lot of laws against women in Sudan. Of course, the notorious public order law that's supposed to be for everybody, but it's mostly directed at women. And that needs to be completely removed immediately after the agreement. There is also other laws regarding the khitan, which we've been trying to push for it, FGM, to be criminalized, and they keep playing games and not pass it. But many other things, but most important, I want to conclude by saying, to look for the future, first, of course, we have to do this internally. The Sudanese have to clean their act, and we have to bring everybody to justice. The junior policeman, the junior officer, the senior people, and people at the top. Everybody has to be asked of why and how and what they did. However, the future of Sudan, I think, with our voices, with the voices of the young people, and particularly the women, we would like to have a legally and culturally environment where women have full rights to their bodies, to their decisions, to their sexuality, to their reproduction. No guardianship. No guardianship by the family, no guardianship by the states or the religious leaders. That's the future of Sudan we want to look forward to. And we will do it internally, and we will speak up, but we will need the international community to keep putting pressure, because Sudanese women are not less than women anywhere in the world, to ask for their full rights, not just to stop the violation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've heard now in some depth about the violations committed against women, against physicians, and how institutionalized and entrenched it is, and that there's been a lack of accountability. So I'd like to ask you, Mr. Osman, what do you think the changes on the ground now could mean for accountability for these violations?
Thank you very much, Leila, and thank you all for coming. We have seen how violations occur since December 2018, but I want you to remind yourself about the situation in Sudan when the Darfur situation erupted in 2003. Umar al-Bashir and his allies, the Janjaweed, who have been transformed recently to be called Rapid Support Force, are responsible for the killings of almost 600,000 Darfuris destruction of more than 15,000 villages all over the region, forceful displacement of more than 4 million people from their homes. Some of them are still in the camps inside Sudan, and others as refugees outside the country. All of these people are not able to go back to their original homes because of the lack of security. This now since 2003. Crops and livestock has been destroyed completely. Rape has been used as a weapon of war. Today, people are seeing it happening. When rape occurs and happens in front of male relatives, husbands, sons, and when also rape targeted young girls as young as 7 years old. I've seen it. We have recorded this in our center when we were working on the ground of Niala and Al-Fashma. Atrocities and violations of basic human rights is a huge legacy for anybody today, not only in Sudan, but it's the responsibility of the international community as well. It's the UN Human Rights Council. This panel is about the responsibility of the UN Human Rights Council. I am so sad that I have been here for more than a week when the whole world was pushing to let the council adopt a resolution about sending a fact-finding mission to Sudan to investigate into incidents of said June. Only that was a request. Then, as it always happens, politics intervened and impeded this effort. We have been very much disappointed. We have been like that for more than 30 years now. Whenever something comes towards justice and accountability, politicians will come, and then there will appear something that is called peace against justice. Let's neglect justice for peace. Unfortunately, we have never seen peace. We have never seen justice. We never seen both of them at all. So this is the situation today. It remains there. It's unpredictable when there are rumors that 5 individuals from this MTC members will be included in the Supreme Council. They will be there for 3 solid years, enjoying impunity. They will be untouchable. This is not acceptable. This is the responsibility of the council to look at it. Because history shows that in the light of we don't have the competent and willing judiciary system in our country. That's why the situation of Darfur has been referred to the ICC as a recommendation of Professor Kassesi, who led the investigation committee into Darfur. And that was good because it ended up with indictment for al-Bashir and 3 of his allies. But unfortunately, although they have been indicted, identified, but they are still also beyond the reach of justice. So this will be the same situation if the council counts on the fact that now we have a national inquiry committee. This will lead us to nothing. After 3 years, we'll come back to this council asking them to send an international committee because the national one will never be able to to implement its mandate due to the hostile environment, due to the fact that there's nothing that can be done regarding justice and accountability. My recommendation is that the UN Security Council has legal responsibility to protect the people of Sudan. And they have to see ways how they can supervise or be there in Khartoum, even if it's a national committee. There's necessity that some element, international or regional element, is very much needed there to guarantee that such a committee can be able to come to consequent findings that can help the victims who are waiting to listen some news from the international community. Thank you very much, and I will be ready also to respond to questions if somebody wants to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think very many of us, including in this room, share your disappointment about the failure of the Human Rights Council to respond to the situation in Sudan, which, as many of you know, has a longer history, with resolutions on Sudan and the independent experts mandate being gradually weakened, even though there was no improvements to speak of on the ground. And so we had hoped indeed that at this session we would finally see action taken to put in place a fact-finding mission, which we have not seen yet. And with that, I would like to turn to our last speaker, Mr. Abdel-Bari. Could you tell us a little bit more about the recent changes and more about the expectations that you have to the international community and the Human Rights Council, and what can be done going forward to rectify the failures as of yet?
I would like to thank everybody for being here, and thank you, Leila, for the introduction. I would like to speak very quickly about the deal and about what the Council, the Human Rights Council, should specifically do as far as human rights in Sudan are concerned. The deal that was reached a couple of days ago, we are yet to see a final document. It was a political deal, a power-sharing deal. It doesn't deal actually with any issues or problems that have been holding Sudan back for decades. Politicians, as my fellow panelists mentioned, focus on power more than anything else. And sometimes, for that, they actually ignore or overlook other fundamental issues like human rights, accountability, or even achieving transformational changes or reforms in society. And it seems that the deal that was reached a couple of days ago is not an exception. It focuses entirely on power sharing between the military council in Sudan and the freedom and change forces. It does not actually lay down any foundations for a system or a process to deal with issues such as identity, marginalization of certain ethnic, religious, and cultural groups in Sudan, and it does not speak about the relationship between the center and the peripheries. These are issues that actually have been the main reason of Sudan's problems. And if you don't address them, there is no way that Sudan could actually move one step forward. The deal, in addition, sidelines human rights. It does not say anything about the rapid support forces. It doesn't say anything about the national intelligence and security services, or the former regime, al-Bashir, and the strong men and women who were actually around him. And it doesn't make any mention of how to dismantle the deep human rights violating state that al-Bashir established in Sudan over the past few years. Nor does it speak of the central problems of Sudan, one of the central problems of Sudan actually, which is the involvement of the army in politics. In fact, it gives the army 50% of the seats in the Sovereign Council, which is going to be the highest level of government during the transitional period. This means that the situation is very unclear, it is very unpredictable, and this means that there should be some involvement of regional and international institutions and bodies, especially as far as human rights are concerned. And in my opinion, it is very unfortunate that the Human Rights Council failed to act since December 2018. It has remained silent in December 2018, and it is and also at its 14th regular session, and ahead of and during its 41st regular session. And by remaining silent, the Human Rights Council validates the current sidelining of human rights from the regional mediation and overall political process. The Human Rights Council should stand ready, in my opinion, to act, including A, by convening a special session, and B, by setting up an inquiry into all acts of violence against peaceful protesters since December 2018. This inquiry should meet a number of characteristics. First, it should be independent, impartial, comprehensive, and thorough. In this context, it should address patterns of violations and the chain of command up to the highest level, cover the whole country, not just Khartoum, and events since December 2018, while addressing patterns and recurrence of violations. This inquiry should use standards of proof that will enable the identification of perpetrators and pave the way for prosecutions. It should specifically address the RSF issue and the NIS issue and their violence in Sudan, their previous violence, their current violence, and any violence that they will commit in the future. The Human Rights Commission should ensure long-term monitoring and reporting at its 42nd session in September 2019 and beyond. It should focus on systemic human rights issues and the recurrence of violations which is due to decades of impunity and lack of systemic human rights reforms in Sudan. The Council should urge the signing of a memorandum of understanding, which is now ready between the OHCHR and the soon-to-be established Sovereign Council, to operationalize a fully mandated OHCHR country office with technical advice, monitoring, public reporting, and unhindered access to individuals and places throughout the country. And finally, the Human Rights Council should actually collaborate with the African Union, because its actions complement and support regional efforts. In particular, that now a deal has been reached under the African Union auspices. The AU can use the Human Rights Council to ensure that pressure is put on parties, specifically on the TMC and its members who will be sitting on the Sovereign Council to implement the deal. It is in the interest of the Sudanese people and the African Union and the international community to see this deal implemented, improved, to achieve peace, justice in Sudan, and create a human rights state, an accommodating state that does not marginalize any person or group in Sudan. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think you very clearly and powerfully outlined the steps that the Human Rights Council should take and which is fully within its mandate to take. With that, I think we're very privileged to be joined today by these four Sudanese human rights defenders and experts. I'd like to give you all an opportunity to ask questions as well. So we will open up the floor and I'll take a couple questions at a time. Please do introduce yourself before you speak and keep your questions brief so we can hear from as many as possible. Yes, the gentleman in blue.
My name is Motosim. I'd like to ask about the committees that will investigate the massacre that was committed on Sudan. And when hundreds of people were killed, a lot of them were thrown in the Nile after they were dead. And there were also so many other crimes like rape and other things. There is a position asked for an international committee to investigate, and then it downgraded to a regional committee, and then at last it agreed to a national committee, only a national committee. And this national committee, because now the military council is accused of committing this crime, but the military council will be in control of the sovereign council, and it will still have all its power, political, executive, and financial. So we'll have the Orwellian situation where the accused will pick the committee that will investigate the crime it is accused of. This is really surreal. So I'd like to ask you, this National Committee of Investigation, does it have any chance to be truly independent and credible and immune to pressure? If yes, why? And if not, also why? Because the argument and the details. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have another question? Yes, please.
Hello, I am Al-Khattabi from Germany, but from Yemeni background. I am happy to hear about Sudan. But I think we have big problem, not just in Sudan, but in the whole Arabic world. We had the hope that Sudan is being better than other revolutions. But the problem is the Arabic interference in this issue. How you evaluate the Arabic interference in this in Sudani revolution? We still have hope because Sudan was from the first world Arabic world countries ruled by Islamic regime, and they have very good experience how is difficult and tough Islamic regime in the country. And the question is how to evaluate the interference, Arabic interference, and what do you expect in the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'll give our panelists a chance to answer these two, and then we'll open up for more.
With regard to the first question regarding the establishment of a national investigation commission or body, I think the chances of success for that body are very slim. And I say this for a number of reasons. I will mention two of them. The first is what you have just mentioned, that the military council or its members will be sitting as members of the Sovereign Council. And we all know that the members of the military council were actually the security committee of al-Bashir and his regime. We know that some of them were involved in committing human rights violations in Darfur. Some of them ordered or actually were involved in the massacre of June 3rd. So I don't think they will allow any independent, impartial, and thorough process of investigation. That is one reason. The second reason is our history. We have seen a number of national investigation commissions, and you could actually think of the Darfur Commission that was established. The report even did not come out. So I don't think it will actually be different from that commission or from any other previous commissions. For this reason, that's why we recommend that the council, the Human Rights Council, should have a role in launching an inquiry, an independent inquiry internationally. This might push the government inside, the new government, the soon to be established government, to actually have an independent process. And if that doesn't happen, then the international process will help us discover the truth and hold those who committed violations accountable.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing related to this point, to the one that's discussing the National Committee. Yesterday, Burhan, who is the head of the TNC, came out on public TV and he said he is 100% sure that no TNC's member is involved in the June 3rd attack and the killing of the 128 protesters and the rape of more than 80 cases. And I believe this gives us a hint on how the committee will function. And it gives us an idea if a guy in his leadership can come to this conclusion even before the committee is appointed, this will give us a good idea on how the direction will be.
Sure. To add to the remarks of my colleagues, there's something that is important we should know. If this committee is established today, it will not be able to start its work today. Why? Because of the environment. We don't have the laws. We have laws that encourage the culture of impunity. Article 10, that Sudan was shipped to Article 10, by the way, recently here in the council. It was meant to provide technical assistance. It never happened. So this will take time, and that means what? Delay. Because the nature of incidents that occurred in Khartoum, said June, they need urgent investigation. Any delay would lead to the destruction of evidence. And again, we have fears that even witnesses and victims will be in danger if they identify themselves, if they come forward to file cases. This is the fear by the time. So it will be any way of justice delays is justice denied. So it's one of the challenges for the community, the local community. About the internal, there is no doubt that Emirates, Saudi, and Egypt are very much involved in this internal situation of Sudan. These are the people, maybe even the investigation might lead to a point that some of them have been implicated in a way or another of the killings that occurred in Khartoum. This is my responsibility. I'm a lawyer. I've been working on that for so long time. So you can look at the vehicles, the armor inside Khartoum everywhere. It is from Emirates, it is from Saudi. They are responsible. These are the arms that were used to kill the people of Sudan. That is what's the question.
Okay, I want to address more the second question. With all due respect of the history of how things happened in the Arab Spring, how previous investigations didn't work nationally, I actually would like to applaud the Sudanese uprisings last revolution as a step forward in history. It's different. It's guarded by hundreds of thousands of youth, women, and Sudanese people in general from all across Sudan, in every city and in every village. So let's just not forget that. These are the real protectors of the revolution. Now, I don't want to give a sense that in this room that the agreement was just a power-sharing, irrelevant agreement. The agreement is what's possible to grab some power from very ferocious, deep state. So let's just start with the positive also and what we all can do. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Emirates don't care whether Sudan burns. They want our land, they want our resources, and they also want to keep the region undemocratic. Unfortunately, the international community has let go of regional politics. The African Union, so we are between two regions in Sudan. The African Union, which is now playing a fairly good role, although within the African Union there are those who are trying to play games, especially Egypt, who's the head of the, chairing the African Union right now. But there is also the Gulf and the money. But I have to say, and we know, that the reason these military people sat on the table and agreed to this not very perfect agreement, what's possible, not what's perfect, is because they lost their support from these three countries because of international pressure. Because they tried to get civil support from within the country, they went to the doctors, they went to the traditional leaders, and they could not get enough internal support. Even the deep state with its national, the NIST security, with all their apparatus, could not guarantee them to announce an independent government, which they wanted to do, and announce an election within 9 months, which was the original plan to become Egypt. Didn't happen. So let's just keep hoping. The Sudan is not Egypt. And Sudan of tomorrow is not the Arab Spring. And I just want to also remind people, the agreement of the Forces of Freedom and Change, the actual document that they signed on, has a lot of very positive actions towards the future of Sudan, including equal citizenship, distribution of power to the periphery, women, youth. There's a lot in it. It will happen, it will not happen, I cannot guarantee. But what will guarantee it is the internal power and the pressure of the Sudanese people first. To me, the Sudanese people first. Then we can play on the regional, positive, progressive forces, whether it's Ethiopia or others, to support that, and try to marginalize and put pressure on the conservative Islamist power, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Emirates, or Egypt, or even Qatar and Turkey. They're all playing games, and of course Russia and China, who have their economic issues. So yes, we know the regional politics, we know the international geopolitics. It's the Sudanese people are the guardians first, and that's why I would like to see some national mechanisms happen and succeed, perhaps. At least we give them a chance. Because a powerful and restructured Sudanese society and Sudanese legal system is more sustainable than any international intervention. Although I do support international pressure to stop all these interventions from happening. Thank you.
I'll take 2 more very quick questions. I see the lady in front here. Rosalind, sorry.
Thank you very much. Rosalind Marsden from Chatham House. I just wondered if I could also, perhaps continuing the line of discussion from before, just another question on this issue of the agreement to have a national committee of inquiry. As I understand it, after the 3rd of June massacre, the Forces of Freedom and Change said that one of their 6 preconditions for resuming direct negotiations was that there should be an independent international investigation. And for the reasons mentioned by members of the panel, we know that Sudan does not have an independent and capable judiciary, as the UN Commission of Inquiry itself concluded, that state institutions have not yet been reformed, and that process, even if it goes ahead, would take time. We also know the Military Council has already conducted its own internal investigation and even dismissed the Attorney General when he questioned the conclusions on the grounds that they weren't credible. So I just wondered also the fact that 5 UN human rights experts, I think, in a statement on the 12th of June, said that the situation required an independent investigation to be set up by the Human Rights Council. So I wondered if one of the panelists could just comment on why do you think the Forces for Freedom and Change compromised on this really crucial point and accepted a national committee?
And then the gentleman in the very back there, sorry, I haven't seen you.
Thank you very much. My question to the panel,
could you please, sorry, introduce yourself first?
sorry.
And I was actually pointing to the person in the very back, but we'll take you as well.
Go ahead. No, if you want to.
Thank you. Sorry, I haven't introduced myself. My name is Abdulaziz Muhammad. My question to Shaza, as you mentioned about the cases, you said there are only 80 cases or more than 80 cases of sexual assault. But in fact, I mean, did you even look deeper in terms of the cases that the sexual assault that occur in Darfur and The other question is, how do we guarantee the safety of the victim to come out and speak? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and sorry about that. And then one final question from the back.
Thank you. My name is Khalid from Sudan. Actually, it's an intervention more than a direct question. Everybody in the room here knows that democracy is based on three principles. Based on tolerance, which means acceptance of others, pluralism, and we can't have a democracy without acceptance of others. The second principle is separation of powers, legislative, executive, and judicial. So we can't accept, if we really want a real democracy, we can't accept that all these three powers should be in the hand of one political power. And the third principle is in regard of justice and basic rights. We know democracy. The speakers, the distinguished speakers, actually, I do believe we need to talk about whether democracy is an isolated event or it's more a process consisting of different phases. Because now, in the right phase, we should actually focus on human rights, basic human rights, and human rights needs for Sudanese. We should talk about the rights of people killed in the different phases of the revolution. And now, the agreement between the military council and the freedom and change power forces, I think we should accept that. We shouldn't. I mean, it's a first step to go forward to the right direction. After 3 years, we can have an election, we can have an elected government where we can talk more about details the distinguished guest talked about. At the right time, I think we need to talk about freedom. We need to talk about culture of peace. We need to talk about how we can accept others, how we can be united in Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think with that, I'll give each panelist a chance. We only have a couple of minutes, but to respond to the questions and make any final remarks at the same time. So maybe let's just start with this.
So, with regard to the first question from Ambassador Rosalind, I think the reason is what I mentioned at the beginning of my statement, which is that the FFC wanted power. It is a power sharing deal. It is not a deal actually to take Sudan to a political transformation. And this is a problem that has been actually occurring in Sudan time and time again. So for me, I think that the solution is not to share power. The solution is to create a system, is to create a process through which anybody or organization can gain power. In other words, it would have been better for the FFC to focus on how to create a different system of government, a different type of government in Sudan, without necessarily being part of the government. And in my perspective, the ideal scenario was to actually agree on organizing elections. But because the Sudanese political parties are disconnected from the people, they do not actually know if they will win or not if there are elections in 1 year. They decided to actually accept a power sharing deal instead of creating a process or a system. That is the main the demand of establishing an international inquiry commission.
All right, so I would just very briefly, we all know that it's clear there was like no way to go forward except doing a negotiated deal with the TNC. After 30 years of being under Bashir's regime, the revolution would have not done a much more radical kind of transition in Sudan. long time, like lots of reports have been done on that. It was so kind of astonishing to see the same thing happening in June 3rd, but that was the fingerprints of a Janjaweed. We know that. We've seen these crimes before, and that was very shocking for us to see it happening inside Khartoum, but this gives us an idea on how brutal it was in Darfur, and I believe they are all connected. But just in terms of addressing the recent violations, we need to do that, to get those who were involved held accountable, and to keep putting pressure on the previous tools like the ICC and other international procedure to get those held accountable, because justice and accountability will never be left behind over time. We need to get all these addressed in the new state of Sudan.
We're being physically taken out of the room, but if you have a 10-second last words for the room, please.
As the compromises you asked, Your Excellency, I think there are so many reasons not yet revealed. Outside pressure, interests of other countries, like the Emirates, the Saudi Arabia, maybe Egypt. These countries have played role in, I don't know, but the compromise is not coming from their entities. Again, this is coupled with the fact that a lot of people are saying the composition of the negotiated body itself is a problem. They are not in a position to be aware of the demands of other people in other parts of the Sudan. For Dr. Khalid, this is a panel that is addressing issues of atrocities and violations, and the necessity for justice and accountability. Democracy is something that is very much related to other areas, but we are here to demand that this time criminals should not feel that they are left to go with their crime.
Fully agree with you.
Okay.
Okay, very quickly, I want to say, starting with democracy in this panel, I do disagree with some of the opinions. I believe this agreement was what was possible. There were guns on the heads and bodies of Sudanese people by a ferocious militia. We had to stop the guns. We had to get some power. Sharing of power is a strategic step, not an ultimate goal, which has been how it's been portrayed. Through that power, and with the support of the hundreds of thousands of Sudanese people, hopefully we'll make this very defective agreement, very compromised agreement, into slowly a democracy, a good Sudan, but it had to happen to stop the killing. If, therefore, Ambassador, you asked the compromise, because if they didn't do that, more Sudanese people would have been killed, because the main culprit is Hemeti himself. If Hemeti knew that he was going to be tried immediately, he would have kept killing people. Hemeti had to be stopped so that we can move forward. That's why the compromise. You asked why the compromise? The compromise because if Hemeti was indicted, more of us would have been killed. That's all I can say.
Thank you very much. I think the synthesis is clear that while we remain hopeful and work on a national and regional level, the international community and the Human Rights Council must also play its part. And of course, we can be available outside of the room to continue the conversation. Thank you so much for coming, everyone, and thank you to the co-sponsors as well.